Imagine being a child who is like fundamentally more terrified of a common stag beetle than of an actual ghost.
Right, a spectral hovering ghost,
Hmm.
which is usually a kid's worst nightmare.
Exactly. But for him, the beetle was worse simply because it looks and operates like a machine with all its gears and works just right there on the outside.
It's such a specific, highly analytical fear for a child to have.
It really is. And today we are dissecting the mind of that exact boy. A boy who built entire imaginary political empires, mapped out trade routes, and recorded the histories of talking frogs.
All of which he did, largely to escape the chaotic, grief-stricken, just endlessly rhetorical anger of his own father.
Yeah, we're exploring the foundational years of a genuinely fascinating mind. We're doing a deep dive into excerpts from a deeply personal autobiographical work by C.S. Lewis. It's titled Surprised by Joy.
And the mission for our deep dives today is to extract the absolute core nuggets of insight from this text. We want to understand how a person's inner life, their imagination, their intellect, their deepest spiritual longings, how all of that survives.
And not just survives, but adapts and evolves, especially against this backdrop of childhood trauma, oppressive educational systems, and this relentless pursuit of an elusive feeling he calls joy.
It is a phenomenal set of sources we're working from today. We're looking at the author's own forensic, highly analytical recollections of his youth.
Yeah, it stretches from his birth in 1898 in Belfast, straight through the psychological crucible of Edwardian British boarding schools.
Right, all the way up to his profound intellectual awakening on the very eve of the First World War.
So whether you are someone who loves diving deep into the architecture of how brilliant minds are shaped, or you're just insanely curious about the bizarre realities of those old boarding schools, this deep dive is completely custom-tailored for you.
What makes this text so compelling is that he isn't just giving us a chronological diary. He's basically conducting an autopsy on his own psychological development.
An autopsy is the perfect word for it. He's looking back with this philosopher's precision to figure out exactly which environmental pressures forged his intellect.
And which internal defenses he had to build simply to survive it all.
So how does a child with an overwhelmingly active imagination survive the sudden collapse of their secure world? We have to start at the bedrock.
Right, the emotional baseline of his childhood,
Mm-hmm.
which is really defined by his parents.
Yeah, he was born into this house overflowing with books. But more importantly, a family defined by a stark, almost irreconcilable contrast in temperaments.
That parental dynamic is everything. It establishes the entire framework for his later psychological defenses.
So let's talk about the father first.
Well, his father was of Welsh descent, and the author describes him as sentimental, passionate, and highly rhetorical.
He was a guy whose emotions just sat entirely on the surface.
Right. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He laughed easily, he wept easily, and he had a profound talent for public speaking.
Political oratory was kind of his thing.
Yes. But then you have his mother, who was a Hamilton.
Right, Norman and Irish descent.
And they were fundamentally a cooler, more detached race. They were critical, ironic, and they possessed what the author calls a high talent for happiness.
I love that phrase, a high talent for happiness. Like, they went straight for it the way an experienced traveler goes for the best seat on a train.
Exactly. They didn't agonize over things. They simply lived well.
That contrast is so vivid. You have this tranquil, cheerful, logically minded mother who was actually a promising mathematician, by the way.
Paired with this volatile, deeply emotional father who devoured Shakespearean tragedies.
It's quite the mix. And in 1905, when the author's about 7, this family moves into what they simply called the new house.
And the way he describes this house, it functions almost as a major character in his development.
It wasn't just a setting. It was this sprawling, labyrinthine place. Long corridors, empty sunlit rooms.
Wind howling under the roof tiles.
Yeah, and books everywhere. Books stacked 2 deep in the cloakroom, shoulder high in the cistern attic.
And the key thing here is that he was allowed free rein. Nothing was censored.
Nothing was forbidden.
Yeah.
He could pull any volume down and read it.
That physical environment provided a vast canvas for a solitary, imaginative child.
He and his older brother became absolute allies, like confederates creating intricate worlds within the geography of this house.
But this general humdrum happiness was punctuated by that very specific terror we mentioned earlier.
The insects.
Right. His overwhelming phobia of insects. He states explicitly he'd rather meet a ghost in the dark than a tarantula.
which is wild. And his reasoning is incredibly revealing, especially when you think about his later philosophical worldview.
Because it wasn't just a simple fear of creepy crawlies.
No, he had this terrifying pop-up book as a child, this nightmare cardboard engineering where a giant stag beetle threatened a midget child.
You could physically manipulate the pincers to make them go snip-snap?
Ugh, horrifying. But the fear obviously goes much deeper than a bad pop-up book. It's about the mechanism.
It is entirely about the mechanism. He theorizes that insects are terrifying because they are like French locomotive.
Because they have all their works on the outside.
Exactly. For a highly sensitive child, insects represented a profound dread of the mechanical, their jerky, unpredictable movements.
Hard exoskeletons, the metallic noises.
It all suggested biological life degenerating into mindless mechanism.
And it gets worse when you think about hives or anthills.
Because that represents the dominance of the collective, the erasure of the individual.
Right, a system where the single entity has zero value outside of its function to the whole.
It was an existential dread of losing individual humanity to a blind, unfeeling system.
Which is terrifying for a child whose entire world is built on his own individual imagination.
And tragically, that fear of losing security, of being subjected to a blind reality, becomes literal.
Yeah. The catastrophic, drawn-out death of his mother from cancer.
This wasn't a sudden, clean break. It was a slow, agonizing withdrawal.
Rooms filled with strange smells, hushed whispers, and doctors everywhere.
And he notes that this event didn't just rob him of a parent. It destroyed the very concept of settled happiness.
The island was just submerged. But what strikes me as the true compounding tragedy here is the secondary loss.
The alienation from his father.
Yes. He didn't just lose his mother, the grief completely alienated the author and his brother from their dad.
The psychological fallout here is the hinge upon which his entire youth turns. The father never recovered his equilibrium.
His nerves were totally shot.
His emotions became completely uncontrolled. Under the immense pressure of his wife's illness and death, his temper became entirely unpredictable.
He would speak wildly, make sweeping accusations.
And act unjustly toward the boys, who were deeply terrified by this raw adult misery.
So they instinctively retreated into themselves. They drew closer to one another.
Becoming, as the author puts it, two frightened oceans huddled for warmth in a bleak world.
That phrasing breaks my heart. And as a survival mechanism, they learned to hide their inner lives from their father.
They absolutely had to, because the way the father expressed his grief and anger was just staggering.
Yeah, because his fundamental nature was that of a public speaker, right? An orator.
So he would utilize the full, overwhelming force of his rhetorical ability on his small children.
There's this visceral example he gives. A child simply walks on the damp grass in slippers.
And the father unleashes an attack that sounds like a Roman senator denouncing a traitor.
Right. He piles on elaborate similes, aggressive rhetorical questions, using massive words like abominable and surreptitious.
Forecasting with absolute certainty that the family would soon be destitute in the workhouse.
Yeah.
All because of damp slippers.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. His father is basically using the emotional artillery of a courtroom prosecutor on a small child who just walked on the grass.
It is entirely disproportionate.
It's like using a bazooka to swat a fly. No wonder the kids learn to lie and hide. You can't respond to that with honesty.
You really can't. You just learn to agree, to lie, and to conceal. It is a profound, tragic irony.
Because the father desperately wanted their confidence, right?
He wanted their affection and their shared grief. Yet his very nature made any genuine vulnerability impossible.
This early trauma, plus the daily need to evade that emotional artillery, undeniably laid the groundwork for the author's intense need for privacy.
And it explains his eventual gravitation towards strict, unsentimental logic.
Right, because logic has rules. Logic doesn't scream at you for walking on the grass.
Exactly. He learned incredibly young that unchecked, fluid emotion was dangerous and deeply unsafe.
So when the physical world becomes that dangerously unpredictable, the mind builds a world where it dictates the rules.
Which brings us to what he actually built inside his mind to survive this period.
And he makes a very sharp, deliberate distinction here between two inner experiences, invention and joy.
Let's examine invention first. This takes the form of an incredibly detailed, sprawling imaginary world.
Originally called Animal Land,
Which later merged with his brother's imaginary country of India.
to become the unified state of Belsen. And Belsen is a deeply revealing psychological construct.
It really is. Because if you expect the imaginary world of a grieving child to be full of fairies and wish fulfillment.
Boxen completely subverts that.
Entirely. It was a fully realized, almost shockingly prosaic political world.
They drew intricate maps, charted steamship routes, established economic tariffs.
They chronicled centuries of complex political history.
Mm.
The author even noted as a child that a historian writing about Boxen must adopt a critical attitude toward its epic legends.
That is wild for a kid. And Boxen featured characters like Lord Big,
An imperious, politically maneuvering frog.
who closely resembled their father in his rhetoric.
Yes, and intriguingly foreshadowed the political persona of Winston Churchill.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Why does he insist that his daydreams were training him to be a fool, but writing about an imaginary country of dressed animals was training him to be a novelist?
Because Boxen demanded discipline. It demanded internal consistency and, above all, objective creation.
Meaning he wasn't the star of the show.
Precisely. In his heroic daydreams, he was the center of the universe. The fantasy existed solely to flatter his own ego.
Subjective indulgence.
Right. But in Boxen, he was the creator standing outside the world. If Lord Big made a political decision, it had to make sense within the established economic reality of Boxen.
So it was a rigorous exercise in world building and character consistency.
And it was entirely devoid of poetry, romance, or mystical longing. It was a mechanical, intellectual exercise.
Which is completely distinct from the profound, disruptive experience he calls joy.
That distinction is the absolute core of his entire life story.
He identifies 3 very specific early experiences of this joy. The first was the sudden memory of his brother bringing a miniature toy garden into the nursery.
A garden made of moss and twigs in a biscuit tin.
The second was reading the Beatrix Potter book Skrollnutkin, which somehow conveyed to him the pure idea of autumn.
And the third was reading a translation of the poem Tegner's Drapa.
Specifically the line, "Balder the Beautiful is dead, is dead."
We must be exceptionally precise about what he means by the term joy. He's using it as a highly technical category.
Because it's not just happiness, is it?
It is absolutely not happiness, and it is most certainly not pleasure. Pleasure is a satisfaction.
Right.
Joy, as he defines it, is an unsatisfied desire, which is itself more desirable than any other satisfaction.
Let me ask you, the listener, to reflect on this for a second. Have you ever felt that sudden, sharp pang of longing for something you can't quite name?
A feeling so intense it almost hurts.
Exactly, like catching the scent of rain on hot pavement or hearing an unresolved chord of music. You wouldn't trade that fleeting ache for regular happiness.
That is what the author means by joy, a pang of homesickness for a place you have never actually visited.
It takes you entirely out of the ordinary material dimension of life, and it had nothing to do with Boxen.
Boxen was safe, controllable, and logical. Joy was inherently disruptive, uncontrollable, and transcendent.
It just strikes without warning.
And vanishes just as quickly,
Yeah.
leaving behind only the agonizing desire for its return.
So just as this young boy is beginning to navigate this inner landscape balancing Boxen and joy, his world is shattered again.
He is violently thrust out of the sanctuary of his home.
Then plunged into the brutal reality of the English boarding school system.
This transition marks a fundamental, traumatizing shift in his spiritual and intellectual trajectory.
In 1908, he and his brother are packed onto a boat and sent to a school in Hertfordshire.
Place he refers to in the text simply as Belsen.
Which tells you everything you need to know. It's run by a headmaster they call Oldie.
The conditions at Oldie's school were objectively appalling, bordering on criminal.
His first impressions of England are colored entirely by grief and shock. He hates the flat landscape, the wooden fences, the accents.
But the geography is nothing compared to the nightmare of the school itself. Oldie was a capricious, physically abusive tyrant.
He would flog the boys mercilessly, right?
He would. And crucially, he often targeted those of a lower social status, or those who simply couldn't understand his erratic instructions.
And the academic education was basically non-existent.
Except for geometry, which Oldie inexplicably taught with rigorous clarity.
Everything else was just pointless arithmetic.
An endless, shoreless ocean of it. The boys were handed slates and told to do sums for hours with no instruction on the underlying principles.
I have to bring up the brothers' survival tactic here because it highlights the complete absurdity of this system.
Is legendary.
The older brother realized nobody was actually checking the math. The whole system was entirely performative.
So he simply did the exact same 5 sums every single day for years.
And walked up to the master, proudly announced he had completed 5 sums, and was praised for it.
A brilliant, cynical adaptation to a completely broken system.
But we have to acknowledge the psychological toll this took on the younger author.
The fear was a constant physical presence.
Yeah.
However, the boys bonded tightly against the common enemy.
They formed a unified front just to survive the day.
And the author notes that this shared trauma forged his lifelong preference for small, tight-knit groups standing in defiance against a hostile world.
He wasn't learning genuine socialization. He was learning the desperate gregariousness of the trenches.
And ironically, it is within the horrific walls of this school that he experiences his first real foray into Christianity.
Yeah, he starts attending a high Anglo-Catholic church associated with the school.
He is suddenly surrounded by men who actually seem to believe the terrifying doctrines they're preaching.
But his motivation isn't born of love or spiritual longing. It's pure, unadulterated fear of hell.
The environment of Belsen perfectly primed him for a fear-based, punitive religion.
Right. If your daily reality is governed by an unpredictable tyrant, an angry, judging God makes total sense.
But a faith built entirely on terror is inherently unstable.
Eventually, the school collapses. Oldie practically loses his mind, parents pull their kids, and the place folds.
The author is then moved to a preparatory school we'll refer to as Chartres.
And it's here, at this slightly better school, that he loses his faith entirely.
The psychological mechanics of that loss are utterly fascinating. It wasn't some grand intellectual rebellion.
He didn't just read Nietzsche and decide God was dead.
No, it was a crushing psychological burden that broke him down.
He had been taught he needed to think about what he was saying when he prayed, which sounds reasonable.
But his anxious, traumatized mind twisted this simple instruction into a horrific requirement.
He believed every single prayer had to be accompanied by a realization.
A vivid, emotional, almost physical manifestation of the concept, produced entirely by sheer willpower.
He would lie awake at night, completely exhausted, doing these agonizing mental gymnastics.
Trying desperately to force himself to physically feel his prayers.
Bedtime went from being a rest to a nightly torment.
He had turned spirituality into a grueling, impossible, mechanical chore.
And he was desperate to drop this burden, which is where the school matron, Miss C, comes in.
She was a deeply kind, comforting maternal woman.
But she was also deeply involved in theosophy, Rosicrucianism, and the occult.
Which provided the perfect escape hatch.
So, wait, what does this all mean? The matron was just a nice lady into higher thought. Is it really fair to blame her for his total loss of faith?
Well, his faith was already a house of cards because he had turned prayer into an unbearable nightly chore.
Right.
Miss C unwittingly provided the exact philosophical exit he needed. By introducing him to the occult, she opened his mind to a realm of preternatural marvels that demanded absolutely no moral obedience.
The strict, terrifying edges of his Christian belief blurred into a comfortable, theoretical vagueness.
The psychological relief he felt was immense. He traded the tyrannous noon of revelation for the cool, unjudging twilight of higher thought.
And the moment that religious faith empties out, two entirely new forces rush in to fill the void.
The first is the arrival of a young master named Pogo.
Pogo is such a character. He's a snappy aggressor, a self-styled man about town.
Utterly obsessed with the music halls, the latest fashions, and current jokes.
He introduces these sequestered boys to swagger, worldly vulgarity, and the intense desire to be in the know.
Pogo represents the raw allure of the world. He wasn't malicious, just profoundly immature.
But under his influence, the author starts desperately trying to act older. He becomes a fop and a snob.
He deliberately adopts a highly artificial, cynical persona, laboring incredibly hard to press his trousers perfectly and plaster his hair down with scented oil.
It's the classic adolescent defense mechanism, building a new identity based on external validation.
But at the exact same time, he experiences a massive aesthetic awakening, a pure renaissance of joy.
He's sitting in the dusty schoolroom, opens a magazine, and sees an illustration by Arthur Rackham.
For Wagner's opera, Siegfried and the Twilight of the Gods.
And it hits him like a physical lightning bolt.
The experience is visceral. It violently plunges him back into that early memory of reading Tegner's Drapa.
Back to the essence of what he calls northernness.
And we need to unpack northernness. It's not just an appreciation for cold weather.
Right, it's a profound spiritual posture.
A vision of huge, clear spaces. Cold, severe, pale, and remote.
This pagan mythology offered him an experience of disinterested adoration.
When he loved the Norse gods, he didn't have to worry about whether they were judging his moral purity.
Or whether his prayers were sufficiently realized.
Exactly. He could just stand in awe of their mythic tragedy. It
Mm.
was worship stripped of self-flagellation.
So he's instantly consumed by Wagner, the ring cycle, and the epic scale of the North.
Just a profound dichotomy.
It's like he's living a double life. By day, he's plastering his hair with oil, trying to be a cynical man about town like Pogo.
By night, he's weeping over the twilight of the gods in his dorm.
Trying to write an epic poem based solely on opera synopsis he read in a gramophone magazine, literally rhyming Alberish with ditch.
Because he simply doesn't know any better. It perfectly captures the absolute chaos of puberty.
But this internal duality is put to the ultimate test when he enters Wyvern College,
A classic, prestigious English public school.
where the outer social world demands total submission, crushing the inner life completely.
The sociological hierarchy at Wyvern is terrifying. You have the Bloods at the absolute apex.
The athletic, physically attractive, powerful older boys, treated like infallible gods.
Below them are the middle-class boys trying to climb the ladder by appeasing the Bloods.
And at the very bottom are the fags, the younger boys treated as a labor pool.
The author provides a scathing critique of this public school machine. It was designed to knock the nonsense out of boys.
To build character and stoicism.
But in practice, it achieved the exact opposite. Because the power of the Bloods was absolute and arbitrary, the system bred rampant sycophancy.
And a desperate obsession with social climbing, not to mention normalized cruelty.
The boys lived in a constant state of low-level anxiety, forever trying to conform and survive the endless physical labor
Like cleaning muddy boots before morning classes.
and the psychological exhaustion of compulsory games.
He hated sports naturally, but at Wyvern, games were a deadly serious path to social advancement.
The spirit of play was completely banished. You had to feign intense enthusiasm for cricket or rugby, or you were an outcast.
This specific environment was incredibly toxic to his inner life.
The sheer compounding fatigue, what he calls being cab horse tired, wore his spirit down to the bone.
Consciousness itself became an evil.
And it is within this context that he makes a highly controversial observation regarding pederasty at the school.
Yeah, we have to look closely at his take on the tarts, the effeminate younger boys who acted as paramours for the Bloods.
He doesn't condemn it with the usual moral outrage. He looks at it sociologically.
He argues that in a microsociety so ruthlessly competitive, these unnatural affairs were actually the only oasis of spontaneity and affection.
It was the only place where a Blood momentarily forgot his immense social importance and showed vulnerability.
He condemns the school's competitive cruelty far more harshly than the carnal sins it fostered as a pressure relief valve.
It is a brilliant counterintuitive perspective.
But he admits he wasn't personally tempted by those physical vices. Instead, he fell into something else.
He became a massive intellectual prig.
He looked at a belching prefect and thought, I would not be he. I read poetry. I am intellectually superior.
He built a massive fortress of highbrow snobbery.
But let me push back on this. Isn't becoming a highbrow just another way of playing the social dominance game?
It absolutely is. He was just replacing an athletic hierarchy with an intellectual one.
Still desperately seeking a way to prove his superiority?
He even wrote a Greek-style tragedy called Loki Bound, where the oppressive Thor represented the Bloods.
And the pessimistic, intellectual Loki represented himself.
Pure psychological compensation.
But eventually, the facade cracks. His father realizes Wyvern is a disaster for him.
He is chronically exhausted and profoundly miserable.
So he's pulled out and sent to Surrey to study privately with a tutor named Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Whom they affectionately call the Great Knock.
And this transition is the intellectual climax of his youth.
We have to recall that his father filtered reality through a sentimental lens.
Right. The dad painted Kirk as this sweet, weeping old man who would gently rub a crying boy's cheek with his whiskers.
Which is hilarious because the reality of the Great Knock was the exact opposite.
Kirk was a ruthless, towering, muscular dialectician, a fierce atheist who demanded ironclad evidence for casual remarks.
There's that hilarious first meeting on the walk from the train station.
The teenage author tries to make polite, grown-up small talk.
He casually remarks that the scenery of Surrey is surprisingly wild.
And Kirk immediately halts in his tracks.
He demands to know precisely what he means by wildness. He asks for the geological or botanical evidence he based his expectations on.
He completely shreds the boy's logic.
Concluding with, do you not see then that you had no right to have any opinion whatever on the subject?
I love this guy. But think about it. If someone did that to you today at a dinner party, you'd think they were a monster.
It breaks every rule of social politeness.
So why did this traumatized teenage boy find it so deeply comforting to be intellectually demolished?
Because it was absolutely clean. It was honest.
After years of fake grown-up conversation with his father,
And surviving the artificial social maneuvering of Wyvern College?
Kirk's brutal logic was profoundly liberating.
Kirk didn't care about social standing or emotional manipulation. He only cared about objective truth.
True intellectual respect requires stripping away polite fictions.
For a boy starving for intellectual substance, Kirk's approach was like offering red beef and strong beer to a starving man.
And his teaching method was just as intense. They didn't plod through Greek grammar.
They read Homer in massive, uninterrupted gulps.
He taught him to actually think in Greek, rather than decoding it like a puzzle.
Under Kirk's tutelage, the author develops the robust dialectical muscles that define his later career.
But his emotional and aesthetic life also matures, thanks to a new friendship with a local boy named Arthur.
Arthur shared his love for Norse mythology, but introduced a crucial new element.
The homely.
Yes, the profound beauty of ordinary, rooted things.
Arthur got him reading Jane Austen and the Brontes. He taught him to look at a muddy drill of cabbages, or an old woman carrying a bucket.
And see the profound, enduring beauty in it.
This synthesis is vital. The romantic desire for northernness is balanced with an appreciation for everyday reality.
He's no longer just escaping into myth to avoid pain.
He's finding beauty in the mud. We see this in his view of the landscape.
He explicitly contrasts the cozy, over-tended landscape of Surrey with the vast, bleak landscape of County down in Ireland.
The way he describes looking at the Mourne Mountains is pure poetry. Seeing the factory smoke and stir of Belfast in the foreground.
And the magical violet mountains hanging in the distance.
It's the perfect physical embodiment of his inner life. The hard reality in the foreground and the unattainable joy on the horizon.
But while he's having this internal awakening, a literal storm is gathering.
The outbreak of World War I.
And his reaction to it is psychologically revealing. He doesn't rush to enlist.
He makes a calculated decision to mentally ignore it entirely until he reaches military age.
He argues that fearing things outside his control is a waste of spirit. He makes a treaty with reality.
It's like putting his brain in airplane mode. He knows the crash might be coming, but until he needs a parachute, he's just going to read his book.
A radical form of self-preservation. And he applies a darker version of this to his father's religious demands.
Yeah, this is a darker shade of his development. To avoid his father's catastrophic rhetorical wrath, he agrees to undergo religious confirmation.
He takes communion, all while being a secret, fully convinced atheist.
He commits what he later views as a profound hypocrisy and blasphemy.
Simply to maintain domestic peace and protect his intellectual fortress.
It shows how deeply ingrained that childhood habit of concealment had become.
It was structurally permanent.
When you lay it all out, the journey is staggering. We set out to unpack the architecture of a brilliant mind.
And we've seen how a terrified young boy built elaborate fortresses of imagination, like Belsen, just to survive his father's grief.
We've seen how oppressive systems like Wyvern breed either crushed spirits or defiant, isolated snobs.
And how true, liberating education often comes from demanding logic, like the Great Knock, combined with grounding friendships.
It proves that intellect and imagination don't grow in a vacuum.
They are forged as direct reactions to our environments, traumas, and teachers.
But beneath it all, the true engine of his inner life remained that relentless pursuit of joy.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to carry with you.
Think about that concept of joy we explored today, that stab of intense longing that is better than any satisfaction.
We spend so much of our lives trying to achieve happiness or acquire pleasure.
But what if the most valuable feeling you can experience isn't the fulfillment of a desire, but the profound ache of the desire itself?
What is the northernness in your own life that you are chasing?
And are you mistaking it for something you can actually catch?
It's a question that challenges how we pursue a meaningful life.
So next time you feel that sharp pang of longing, maybe don't try to solve it. Just let it ring. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Seek out the great knocks in your own life, and we will catch you next time.